4. November 17, 1944, a forgotten crossroads in northeastern France. The wind carried ice as a convoy of U.S. Army trucks rumbled to a stop outside a hastily established prisoner processing camp. Inside the last truck, 38 German women huddled together, their uniforms hanging from thin frames, their eyes vacant from exhaustion. These were not frontline soldiers, but clerks, nurses, and radio operators caught in the Wehrmacht's desperate retreat. As American MPs lowered the tailgate, one woman stumbled forward, her legs barely supporting her weight. Wir haben seit einer Woche nichts gegessen, she whispered. We have eaten nothing for a week. The young American sergeant who heard her words froze, then turned to his lieutenant with a look that would change everything. Sir, they're starving. What happened next revealed a side of war that propaganda never shows, when humanity trumps hatred. Stay with me. This forgotten moment matters. If you appreciate uncovering the human stories behind the battles, subscribe to Obscure World War II Chronicles. We find the moments that textbooks missed but veterans never forgot. Now, let's continue. The processing center was little more than 3 weathered barracks connected by muddy paths, hastily established as Allied forces pushed eastward through France. Rain had fallen steadily for days, turning the ground to thick clay that clung to boots and vehicle tires. Inside the main building, kerosene lamps cast long shadows across wooden tables, where clerks processed the steady flow of prisoners from the collapsing German lines. Staff Sergeant William Delaney stamped forms with mechanical efficiency. At 27, he'd seen enough combat with the 90th Infantry Division to earn a reassignment to prisoner processing. Tonight was supposed to be routine, another batch of Wehrmacht soldiers to register before sending them to larger camps in the American rear. But when the trucks arrived carrying the women auxiliaries, something felt different. The usual shouting and confusion that accompanied prisoner arrivals was absent. Instead, there was an eerie silence as the MPs guided them toward the main building. They're barely walking, Corporal Jenkins muttered beside him. Look at them. Delaney watched as the women stepped carefully through the mud, some supporting others. Their faces were gaunt, cheekbones sharp beneath pale skin. Their field gray uniforms, once tailored to military precision, now hung from their bodies like empty sacks. Probably from that communications unit that got cut off near Metz, Jenkins said. Intelligence said they've been on the run for almost 2 weeks. The first women reached the doorway, blinking in the sudden light. The warmth from the pot-bellied stove hit them like a physical force, and several swayed slightly, their bodies responding to the first heat they'd felt in days. A young MP guided them to benches along the wall, gesturing for them to sit. That's when it happened. A woman in her early 20s, her blonde hair matted beneath a cap, took one step into the room and stumbled. Sergeant Delaney moved without thinking, catching her arm before she fell. She weighed almost nothing, like holding a child. When she looked up at him, her blue eyes seemed to focus somewhere distant. Wir haben seit einer Woche nichts gegessen, she said, her voice barely audible. Delaney had picked up enough German to understand. We have eaten nothing for a week. He turned to Lieutenant Parker, who stood by the processing table. Sir, they're starving. The lieutenant looked over, taking the scene with a single glance. How long since they've eaten? A week, she says. Maybe longer. Parker nodded once. Get Coleman. Tell him I need rations. Now, for the German women, this moment carried more fear than they could express. Propaganda had taught them that Americans showed no mercy to prisoners. They'd been told stories of mistreatment, of humiliation. As they sat on hard benches, they kept their eyes down, shoulders hunched, waiting for whatever might come. What came instead would shatter everything they believed about their enemy. Within 15 minutes, the door to the mess hall section burst open. 3 American cooks appeared, carrying trays stacked with bread, tins of meat, and steaming mugs. The smell hit the room like a wave, warm food, coffee, the richness of butter, smells that belonged to another lifetime before war and hunger. The women didn't move. They stared at the food as if it might disappear. It's okay, Delaney said in halting German. motioning toward the trays. Still, they hesitated. A woman in her 40s wearing corporal's insignia finally asked, "For uns? For us?" "Yes," Lieutenant Parker answered, his voice gentle but firm. "For you." What followed was a moment of pure human connection that transcended the war. The women ate slowly at first, then with growing urgency as their bodies awakened to nourishment. Some cried silently, tears running unchecked down their faces. Others closed their eyes between bites, as if memorizing the sensation of fullness. Private Coleman, the head cook who'd rushed to prepare the food, leaned against the wall watching them. "Jesus," he whispered to Delaney. "They're eating like they expect each bite to be the last because they do," Delaney answered, according to military records later archived at Fort Benning. The 90th Division Processing Center received an 87 female German auxiliaries that November, with 83% showing signs of severe malnutrition. What made this group different wasn't just their condition, but what happened after that first meal. The German corporal, whose name was recorded as Marguerite Keller, eventually explained their journey. They had been attached to a signals unit near Metz when American tanks broke through. Cut off from their division, they'd spent 11 days moving east on foot, avoiding Allied patrols, their rations depleted after the third day. They'd survived on whatever they could find, frozen potatoes from abandoned fields, a single rabbit caught by a former farm girl among them. The last 3 days, they'd had nothing. "We thought you would punish us," she told Lieutenant Parker through an interpreter the next morning. "We were told Americans execute women who served the Wehrmacht." Parker, a high school history teacher from Ohio before the war, shook his head. "That's not who we are." The transformation over the next 48 hours was remarkable. After medical checks, hot showers, and regular meals, the women began to look human again. Color returned to their faces. Their movements grew stronger. And something else changed. The fear in their eyes when Americans entered the room disappeared. Instead, there was confusion, the growing realization that everything they'd been told about their captors was wrong. Sergeant Delaney documented this shift in a letter home to his wife in Pennsylvania. "These women came in looking like walking ghosts, convinced we were going to hurt them. Now I see them nodding when we pass, some even smile." It's a strange thing to watch your enemy realize you're not a monster after all. This small human drama playing out at a forgotten crossroads in France revealed something profound about warfare. Behind the propaganda, behind the uniforms and flags and ideologies, people remain people capable of cruelty, yes, but also of simple kindness. For the German women, the moment of truth came on their third evening at the processing center. They had been informed they would be transferred to a permanent POW facility the following day. That night, Marguerite Keller approached Lieutenant Parker with a small object wrapped in cloth. "For you," she said in broken English. Placing it in his hand, it was an Iron Cross second-class medal, her own decoration for service on the Eastern Front. "Why are you giving me this?" Parker asked. "So I remember," she said carefully, searching for words. "Not all enemies are find." She touched her heart. "Some are mention." Humans. The medal remained with Lieutenant Parker for the rest of his life. His son donated it to the National WWII Museum in New Orleans in 2018. Along with Parker's letters describing the encounter. It sits in a small display case with a simple caption, a reminder that humanity can survive even the greatest of wars. The German women were eventually repatriated in late 1946. Records show that Marguerite Keller returned to her hometown near Stuttgart and became a schoolteacher. In a 1975 interview for a West German documentary on the war, she mentioned the American Processing Center. "They could have let us starve," she said simply. "Many would have. Instead, they fed us, treated our illnesses, spoke to us like people." It was the moment I began to question everything I had been taught about America, about the war, about what we were fighting for. This forgotten encounter, a small moment of decency amid a global catastrophe, reminds us that the true measure of a nation isn't how it treats its friends, but how it treats those completely at its mercy. When 38 starving women stumbled into an American camp expecting cruelty and found compassion instead, something powerful happened. It didn't end the war or change its outcome, 4. But it preserved something equally important, the recognition of common humanity across enemy lines. These small moments of grace weren't anomalies, 4. American military records document hundreds of similar incidents where individual soldiers chose compassion over vengeance. They remind us that even in humanity's darkest chapter, light persisted, 4. Marguerite Keller kept her own memento from the camp, a simple K-ration chocolate bar wrapper that Private Coleman had given her on the day of transfer. 70 years later, 4. Her granddaughter found it among her possessions after her death, carefully preserved in a small wooden box alongside her family photos. On the wrapper, faded but still legible, were the words Coleman had written, "Good luck, 4. Stay human." Perhaps that's the lesson of this obscure moment in the vast chronicle of World War II. Behind the strategies and statistics, beyond the battles that reshape borders, 4. War ultimately happens to individual people with the same capacity for suffering and relief, for cruelty and kindness. When we recognize ourselves in the enemy, something essential about our humanity is preserved, 4. If these forgotten stories of connection across battle lines speak to you, join our journey through the overlooked corners of World War II. Subscribe to Obscure WWII Chronicles, 4, where we believe the human moments between the famous battles reveal just as much about who we were and who we are. This is Obscure World War II Chronicles. Until next time.